So 4 months, 20 countries, 40 plane rides. Here we are back. What an experience. I can't thank Nuffield enough for providing this opportunity. We heard this morning, and I'll say it again, that it really is an opportunity that money can't buy. And the time and the effort that the people of Nuffield and Jim and in particular that put into this is certainly an amazing thing. I'll also thank GRDC. Whilst it's an opportunity that money can't buy, you still need some support, some cash to actually do it. And so for an organisation like GRDC to see the value in this sort of thing is really good. So I've got a background in broadacre grain production, spent 20 odd years as part of a family farm operation in dryland grain production in central Queensland. Corn, wheat, sorghum, sunflowers, that type of thing. About 7 years ago now, we decided we'd go and move over to the coast, go and set up sugar farms a bit. So I actually now farm in an area about an hour's drive south of Townsville on the North Queensland coast. It's an fully irrigated area, predominantly growing sugarcane, but the challenges of moving into the tropics was actually more than I envisaged when I actually first went up there. And but I wanted to go over there and grow some more specialty sort of grain crops, slotting a particular variety of corn, for instance, into a particular market, and we've grown some hybrid seed production stuff and things like that. So after doing that for a few years, and I've known about Nuffield for quite a few years, and always thought I wanted to throw my hat in the ring, and so the opportunity kind of came up. I posed the question as a study topic. Northern Australia has a classic monsoonal type of climate, so you have a wet and dry season. So what other parts of the world have that similar sort of a climate, and what's their farming system look like from a cropping point of view? What crops they grow, what are some of their issues, their rotations, and so on and so on. So I drew a ring around the world, plus or minus 20 degrees latitude, roughly, which is about where Townsville is, 19 actually. Probably little did I know that it's a topic about 400 miles wide. I'll spend the rest of my life looking at it. But anyway, so we headed off with this tribe of intrepid adventurers, and I really got to thank these guys for making it really what it was. It was a fantastic opportunity, and of course there's a couple of these characters that are not here today, which is pretty poor form, really. So thanks, guys. Hey, we should do this again. So where do we go? We've heard a little bit about our global focus tour, and I'll actually concentrate probably more on where I wanted to go from a tropical sort of a point of view. So I started off and found myself in southern India. When I thought I wanted to head off on this thing, I wanted to get out of my comfort zone a little bit. Here I am, straight into it. So we think about the farming systems that these places sort of employed. And sure, a lot of it's dictated by climate and soils and that sort of thing. But often once we sort of get in here, and you realise that it's the social issues that often dictate the why things are the way they are and the way things are getting done and that sort of thing. So, things like, labour, and I'll come back to it a little bit, market proximity, especially in these places like here near Vijayawada in southeast India. So these guys have only got about an acre of ground each. A lot of it's to grow, they grow stuff to actually eat, to feed themselves and their families. And so then, the cultural issues come into it. From what I could see, they're transplanting rice. There was the women doing all the work. And so those sort of things shape the way things are done and what the whole farming system looks like. I mentioned labour. Labour was the most common complaint or discussed topic all over the world. So even through our global focus program, whether we're in the US or Canada or anywhere, really difficult to imagine that when we're in India, and when you're talking to growers, all I want to talk about was tractors and machines, because they can't find anybody to come and do this sort of stuff anymore. Which, when you feel like you're standing on an ant's nest full of people, it's really hard to imagine. So US Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, said at a conference a few weeks ago that there will be crops this year in the US that's not going to get harvested because there's not the labour there to do it. That's in a country like the US. So, but another just a sort of a side issue. A lot of countries are trying to find somebody else to come and do their work for them. Like the US would be completely sort of stuffed without the Mexicans. Western Europe's using the Eastern Bloc European countries those guys to come in and do sorts of things. The Indians try and get the Pakistanis to come and do their work. The Thai guys using guys out of Myanmar, which was Burma, and Laos to come and do theirs, and obviously still trying to figure out who I'm going to get to do my work. But it's a big issue, and this sort of thing. So the guy on the left there demonstrating his in-row cultivating prowess, it's like hard work to me. And then just down the road, we've got, this guy was in-row cultivating his cotton with a couple of ox. And anyway, he asked the question, how many farmers in Australia do I know that still farm with an ox? And I actually thought it was a pretty safe bet to say there's probably none. I was actually also interested. I should have asked him how many pairs of thongs to the acre he got. But what amazed me, I mean, I'd never seen any of this sort of stuff before. Those old Brahmin yaks, they just walked straight up that road, and it just seemed so effortless. He was doing a magic job, and it worked for him. So, and then just, again, similar sort of a place. The cotton on the right there, it had been inter-row cultivated with animals, and I'm just looking at his planting sort of a thing. It's obviously planted in the rows going off the screen, but the seed spacing is actually pretty good. You can see the lines sort of dictated it. And I asked the guy, they were a little bit bigger farmers, and somehow they worked in some sort of a cooperative arrangement. There's questions in these parts of the world, after you ask the same question about 5 different ways, you just put it down to lost in translation. So you sort of miss out on a little bit of sort of stuff. But one of these guys took it back to his house, and under the thatch sort of a roof sort of a thing. Because I asked him about his planter, and so we went back there and he got a piece of wood off the roof, and there was another bit under a bit of a table thing, and it was some sort of an arrangement, a wooden thing that fitted together and rotated and put seeds out. Necessity is the mother of invention, I suppose, and these guys are really, really good at it, but I still couldn't figure out how it worked, but it was interesting the same. At the same time as I was watching the monkeys diving in and out the windows, flogging the fruit out of the kitchens, it was just so different to what anything that we've ever seen before. Another thing about the farming systems in a lot of those places, you notice in that pattern, there's really not much stubble or residue, and you don't see a lot of that sort of thing. In a lot of these communal sort of land tenure systems, you might actually be fairly fond of your stubble, and you can see that it conserves moisture in these dry land type farms. But the next guy with his bunch of goats is going to go and walk them through there because that's what they're going to eat. And it's actually a big issue, and later on when I got into some of the international research agencies, trying to promote more conservation agriculture and keep stubble in the ground, that sort of thing is a major issue on just those sort of cultural sort of things. Climate in the tropics is less defined by temperature, as you sort of realise, So you can sort of do things that you wouldn't do in other more temperate parts of the world. So these two fields of corn are actually adjacent to each other. There's the reasons on why they're like that and all that sort of stuff, there's a whole heap of stuff, but in that particular place, the high temperature in the winter time is about 28 degrees Celsius, and high temperature in the summer time is about 36. It sort of doesn't change a whole lot. But most of the rain comes in that June to October, sort of a wet season, and there's about 1,000 millimetres in that part of the world. And you get very little rain for the rest of the time, sort of thing. And in India, so it's either dry land or in places where they irrigate. The irrigation country generally goes into rice, and if they've got enough water, they tend to just 2 crops of rice a year. Otherwise, they can rotate corn and green gram was a popular thing, which we know as mung beans, cotton, rice, and sugarcane. And those crops were actually fairly common right around the world in these areas. There's a little bit of cassava down the left-hand corner there, which is a root that potato, that type of thing, grows as a tree. So from India, I ended up in Thailand, which is very similar. Bit more mechanisation, a little bit bigger farm size, but still a lot of manual labour as well. But you might see one of these UV headers harvesting corn, in one field and the next door field's still being picked by hand. Costs about $60 a hectare, doesn't matter whether you use a machine or whether you use people. And, but I just can't get over here from a farmer sort of thing. These guys just love their bling on their machines, it's just really fantastic stuff. But you can buy a brand new one of those headers. There's about 3 different manufacturers of those in Thailand. New one's about 60, 70,000 Aussie dollars. And actually, if the North American stuff get much more expensive, we might all be driving these things. So Thailand's very similar, and that. So from there, then we had a big change. We ended up out in the big, wide open spaces of Brazil. They farm sort of, to a large extent, the plateau countries. So it's up high. So where I'm standing there, we had, within a couple hundred metres of that spot, we just had the paddock came to the edge, and then you've got this 100-metre drop-off virtually down to the bottom. It's sort of amazing sort of stuff. But the big thing on why, you ask these questions on why things emerge the way they are. One of my biggest issues in farming in North Queensland on a clay-based soil is in the summertime you can't move. And I suspect a lot of the things holding some of these third world countries back on the clay soils like we saw in India and Thailand, you can walk around in the mud, not too bad, but you can't drive a tractor or a truck or something like that around. This is where the Brazilians got it all over. This sort of loamy, sandy country with about 20% clay in it. You can get 2 inches of rain tonight and you're back harvesting soybeans again tomorrow. So they harvest everything in the middle of the wet season. Grow a soybean crop once it starts to rain in October, get that harvested during January, and you can often get virtually always get a corn crop or a cotton crop in behind, and that's sort of what we're seeing here. They're tangled up with some corporate guys up in the western Bahia state, about 600 k's north of Brasilia, and down in, you can see their cotton modules just disappearing into the horizon, so it's an amazing place. So these guys were picking cotton when I was there, so just looking at the diversity of the place again, some corn there, that guy was a bit further away, had a bit of irrigation, so he just tends to do things all year round. And the stuff on the left, in the bottom corner, those guys were really, took us a while to talk them into getting their picture taken. But that's a crop of cradle area. Now, I know cradle area as a weed, or grey rattlepod, as we call it. But largely they were growing it to get some seeds so they could replant it, but it was actually a very good crop for nematode control. And so they were putting that into their rotation. And the other stuff was rice. A lot of the rice in that part of the world is grown early after clearing, and because it handles the acid soils a bit. Northern Mato Grosso, heavy timber, some of that sort of stuff. I've picked up a lot of sticks in my life, but I haven't tried to clean up timber like that. I think that's just amazing stuff. But anyway, so if I come back to northern Queensland, where it appears that we have a problem with cows eating the cars on our highways, so what did we learn, I suppose, or how do we compare what we learn in some of these places back to what we may or may not do in northern Queensland? But the first thing you notice in that slide that Rob had up this morning, the north of Australia is an awful big place, and it's a long way between waterholes. That in itself creates some of the most major, problems as far as more development and that sort of thing. We don't have big areas of fertile soils like the Brazilians. It's more smaller areas that are a bit more disjointed, often closer to rivers. They're sort of a clay-based sort of a thing to a large extent. And the problems of developing more the north probably haven't changed in an awful long time. So it's a big place, not many people out there, very little infrastructure. Getting around in summertime, as Rob said, can become very problematic just driving on the existing bitumen roads. And then of course there's pretty sensitive environmental issues, and native title comes into play there as well. So they had, there's a variety of issues for more development. So as an example, this is sort of Richmond in inland North Queensland. It's about 600 kilometres west of Townsville. Clay-based soils, got water runs down the rivers in the summertime when it rains, but we really only got a 400 millimetre or 17-inch rainfall. Once you get far from the coast across northern Australia, your rainfall backs off right off. Big difference between 400 millimetres here and 1,000 or 1,500 millimetres that we see in Brazil. Not enough rain to do things in the dry, as a dry land exercise, so it's got to be looking at irrigation. But then all the rain comes in a short period of time. You've got to store it so that you can use that water later when you can actually get around and actually do things. So which means you've got to build some dams. Expensive stuff. Start shipping dirt around. So whether it's a private sort of a build arrangement like the one on the left or the Ord River Dam, it's still big capital costs. And then with all the other things. So this is one of the reasons the north has been quite problematic going ahead. And of course the other thing is you grow something that people and things like eat, so do animals. So between birds and hogs, those birds are actually my place in birding, and I live on the edge of town, you know. Those things can they eat, you know. So that's another. No real easy ways to control those things. I mean, you run out of bullets pretty quick. But in saying that, you know, there's a lot of guys up there that are working. They've found a niche in their programs, whether it's growing silage and feeding it back through their cattle to finish those sorts of things off. We see some of those areas that works pretty well. But it's it's a tough operating environment. And across the north, so you know, the Ord River has had a few different goes. To a certain extent, it's still struggling for a bit of an identity in its world. But it works. But there's issues there, sort of things. But the list of failures up there is nearly as impressive as the list of successes as the years have gone on. So, as a question, you know, the big question might be, how do we support these guys that are up there? Because they're certainly the ones with the expertise that developed it as they went along. And how do our industries and our government agencies better support those guys to go forward? You know, they're the ones in that environment at the leading edge. So that basically pulls us up. I need to really thank Nuffield again, and the people in Nuffield especially, for this opportunity. GRDC for the means to make it happen. Thanks to my wife Tonya and the kids Lewis and Clay. They've allowed me to take this opportunity. It's something I've wanted to do for quite a while, and so I've got out there. My parents Brian and Rhonda, and also Ken and Margaret Dow, that kept the home fires burning and the place ticking along while I was away. But I really want to say, you know, last but not least sort of thing, the people that I've met all over the world that were really gracious in helping me to look at stuff. In some cases they put me up, cart me around, show you this and that sort of thing. And then some of it at really short notice when plans go haywire and that sort of thing. The people are the prize of the world sort of thing. Met some fantastic people, and I got a whole heap of people that I really got to go back and catch up with again. But with all the nonsense that goes on in the world and people that do crazy things to each other, this sort of trip really puts a bit of a warm glow back into the whole thing. So thanks very much.
Is it just too hard in the north, and should we pump the water down to the south?
You need to buy an irrigation farm, see how much money it costs you to ship a big heavy load of your commodity around. You can't ship it south, but the energy required, honestly, we look at, so the Burdekin Dam is where water comes out of my place. They cut that stuff about 100 So back to some mines in Moranbah anyway. They built a pipeline a few years ago. It's about a metre diameter pipe. Must be 200, 250 kilometres or something, I think, back down there. I think there's 8 repumping stations to get it down there. It's costing them about $250 a meg to get that stuff back down there. So in an agricultural point of view, that's cost prohibitive. So whether you can tilt the place and make it run down a thing, I don't know. But again, you know, any big development stuff in this country is just off the radar completely. I mean, you're just building a dam somewhere, which is really frustrating.
I've got a quick question. Is there something you saw, a crop or a technique that you think is something you can bring back and help at home or in the other tropical areas of Northern Australia?
you realise in as many miles as you do and places you visit, you still only see a tiny, tiny snapshot of the world sort of thing. And then you try and pull it together in a story a little bit like this, and you leave out way more than you ever keep back in. But probably towards the end, I ended up in the US, and I've actually got an interest in growing rice back in the tropics, and but under center pivot irrigation sort of thing with better water use efficiencies and things like that. So out of that obviously didn't get back in here because I was trying to concentrate on some of that really tropical sort of stuff. That got me really interested actually. So I think we can do some really good stuff with rice and appropriate varieties and things in North Queensland. There's a whole political thing in this country that's got rice completely stuffed up. That's another whole story.
Aaron, how do you go when you do go to a new area? Like, have you got a farming group there now, or have you got a couple of other blokes trying to do what you're doing, or are you still out there on your own? Or have you gone back to sugarcane?
There's other guys there doing that. We've sort of banded together to a certain extent. We've actually got some research projects up there now, basically trying to, one thing that we really want to do in the first place is just document what we know as far as the farming practices in the tropics, what we, work out what we know, what we don't, to give us a bit of a platform or a recipe sort of thing for growing grains. A lot of that stuff has been figured out, forgotten sort of over the years, and so I'm hoping the outcome of some of that sort of stuff was that we can use that as a base then to say, okay, well, we don't know what, in this part, what nutrition or control or something or other, and we can build on that then to go and leapfrog ahead to continue on. So, but then we have also got a core group of growers that kind of figured out that we can incorporate that into a sugarcane rotation, and with quite a few pluses out of all that. So that's coming along not too bad.